Okay? So, ito yung equation natin. So, sir, paano naging quadratic equation ito? So, we're going to solve, you choose now. Kung gusto nyo, yung Q3 ang gawin nating constant or Q1 yung constant, pwede rin. Okay? So, we're going to assume that Q3 is, Q3 ba yan ito? Q3 is constant. So Q3 is constant. So that when we apply the quadratic formula, or we're going to use the quadratic formula. So review lang natin ano yung quadratic formula. So that is minus b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So we're going to assume that Q1 here is x. Since Q3 is assumed to be constant, this is x squared, this is x. So Q3 is assumed to be constant here. So solve for Q1. So since x is equal to Q1, so Q1 is equal to medyo mahaba yung equation natin. 2a. A is 236.44. Okay? So, mga coefficients natin for B, ito yun. So, don't forget to include Q3 since it is assumed to be constant or part of the coefficient. And A, we have C here. Okay. So from this equation, from the quadratic formula, we can formulate a relationship between Q1 and Q3, an expression of Q1 in terms of Q3, and it will be equal to 0.52 of Q3. So if you try to simplify this equation, then you'll be arriving, or you can use your calculator. So meron naman siya, it can solve yung quadratic equation, yung calculators niya. So I am allowing you to do that. So instead of using yung quadratic formula pwede nyo memorize, you can use your calculators to solve the problem. Okay, and since we already have a relationship or an expression of Q1 in terms of Q3, now we can solve for the discharges. Okay, so remember yung hindi natin pinili kanina na equation. So we have HF1 plus HF3 equals 70. So in terms of discharge, this equation would be 290.39 Q1 squared plus 30.25 Q3 squared is equal to 70. Now you look for an equation now that contains Q1 and Q3 only, and then substitute for the value of Q1 in terms of Q3 and solve for Q3. But since we don't have an equation na ganon, we are going to use yung equation na pinili natin kanina, hindi natin pinili kanina, since we have 4 equations kanina, and we only have chosen 3. So the fourth one would now relate Q1 and Q3. So substitute natin yung value ng Q1 dun sa equation na. So you have 290.39 Q1 squared plus 30.25 Q1, I'm sorry, 290.39 Q1 squared, that is 0.52 Q3 squared, plus 30.25 Q3 squared is equal to 70. Now we can solve for Q3. That is equal to 0.802 cubic meters per second. So that is Q3. And with this expression, we can solve for Q1. Q1 is equal to 0.52 of Q3, that is 0.802. So Q1 is 0.417 cubic meters per second. And from our original equation, so I think this was our third equation, Q2 is equal to Q3 minus Q1. Okay, so we have 0.802 minus 0.417. So the discharge in pipe 2 is 0.385 cubic meters per second. Okay, none. Okay. So that's how we solve for the discharges using this method. So again, let's try to review yung procedure natin. Okay, so sa mga type 2 problems, pag type 2 problems, given lang yung elevations ng reservoir and then yung properties ng pipes. So mahirap to compare sa first type ng problems. So first is to identify the direction of flow dun sa may middle pipe, middle reservoir. Okay, so we have two possible conditions here. This one, Q2 is going towards reservoir B, or Q2 is going towards the junction, no? And that will be dependent on the piezometric reading dun sa may junction. Now to do that, kailangan nating close natin yung pipe 2, which means HF2 is equal to 0. So we cannot solve, walang head loss sa pipe 2 kasi since wala naman nag-flow na tubig. So that means that the piezometric reading, yung elevation ng piezometric reading ay parehas lang dun sa elevation ng middle reservoir. In this case, we have reservoir B. And then solve for the head loss. Okay, solve yung head loss ng pipe 1 and pipe 3. Okay, then we can have after solving for the head losses, we can solve for the discharge in pipe 1 and discharge in pipe 3. So we are going to compare the computed values of Q1 and Q3. Now if Q1 is greater than Q3, that means Q2 is going towards reservoir B. Ibig sabihin, yung piezometric reading natin at the junction is higher in terms of its elevation compared to reservoir B. That means that the pressure at the junction is enough to push the water para pumunta doon sa may reservoir B. Now, if Q1 is less than Q3, mas kaunti or mas malaki yung discharge sa may reservoir sa may pipe 3, that means na Q2 is going towards the junctions or pababa. The direction of Q2 is going downwards or going towards the junction. That also means that the piezometric reading is lower in terms of its elevation compared to the elevation of reservoir B. That means the pressure of the junction is not enough to push the water para pumunta doon sa reservoir B. No? Okay, so in this case, Q1 is less than Q3, so that our equation for discharge or equation of flow, this would be our equation of flow. Q3 equals Q1 plus Q2. No? Okay, so that's the first step. So you're going to identify the direction of flow, the middle pipe or middle reservoir. Next now is to establish the equations for discharge and head losses in terms of discharge. So we're going to express each head loss in terms of the of discharges. Okay, and then after that you're going to choose. So we can formulate 4 equations here, but we're going to choose 3 only. One would be the equation of discharge, and the 2 would be coming from the equations of head losses. Okay, so you can choose. So we have chosen equations 1 and 2. With you can solve this problem using different combination. And then we're going to formulate a quadratic equation that would relate now Q1 and Q3, or kung ang pinili nyong discharge equation kanina ay yung isang equation, you can relate Q2 and Q3 or Q1 and Q2, whichever is the case. So after formulating a quadratic equation, so make sure that the right side of the equation is equal to 0. We use a quadratic formula to create an expression relating Q1 and Q3, after which you can now solve for either Q1 or Q3. So you look for an equation previously, formulate natin na equation and substitute the value or the relationship, the value of Q1 in terms of Q3 or Q3 in terms of Q1 in that particular equation and solve for the discharges. Okay, so yun lang. Medyo mahaba yung solution. Na-consume tayo ng mga 4 na pages. Okay, so that's it.